Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Atlantic Council think tank in Washington, D.C., where we have with us Jorge Benitez, who is the editor of the NATO Source blog, one of the Transatlantic Alliance's #1 sources of information. George, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure, Vago. Thank you for having me.
I think there's a big summit that's going to happen next week in Brussels. Leaders from all 28 nations are going to gather, look at strategy. The Trump administration, this is President Trump's first outing to, it's his first international trip, stopping in Saudi Arabia, Israel, as well as the Vatican to meet with the Pope, and then going on to Brussels. What are going to be some of the key issues that he's going to be wrestling with? The United States has made clear that 2%, more than 2% is the goal, and is pressuring alliance members to do that. But what are some of the concrete issues, points the U.S. is going to raise, pushback the U.S. is going to get, and what the final declaration is probably going to read like?
The President has two key issues and priorities for this NATO meeting. His main one is the defense spending levels of our NATO allies. Also, he wants to see increased improvement on NATO's role in counterterrorism. I think he's going to get some help on counterterrorism. I don't think he's going to see much improvement in NATO defense spending in addition to what they're already doing. In addition to that, the General Dunford was in Brussels this week for a meeting of the NATO Chiefs of Defense, and there he is asking for NATO allies to increase their troop contributions to Afghanistan. That's going to be a big issue, and I think that sort of may be a compromised position. If the NATO allies aren't increasing their defense spending as much as Trump may want, they may be able to strike a deal with him by contributing more troops to Afghanistan, which is more an issue and a problem that there's much more consensus on.
Let me take you to the question of troop levels. Overseas, senior defense officials have told me that it's a lot easier for their countries to cough up troops and support for the United States when the American president is popular. Some of them have noted that because George W. Bush was less popular than Obama, it was tougher for them to come up with troops when George Bush asked them for it than when Obama asked them for it, for example. And a few of them have pointed out that Trump is polling at record lows in their country for an American leader. How does that potentially affect the troops debate and the challenge the United States is going to have to get as many partners to go with it back to Afghanistan as it would like?
I don't think that's a very persuasive rationale. The main issue with Afghanistan, it is becoming destabilized. As our ISAF commander, our Inherent Resolve commander, testified before Congress, he said in 2016, Taliban gained more territory than in 2015. So it's a very precarious situation. The security situation is not going well. The Afghan government needs help. But they're also starting to see the more direct effect of the negative consequences. So that in a country such as Germany, they've been pretty forward-leaning on this. They've been willing to increase their troop levels, even as far back as the Obama administration, because they see that the second source of refugees to their country is coming from Afghanistan. So the more they can do to stabilize the situation there, the better it helps the security situation in Europe.
So ultimately, do you think that the countries are going to come up? So countries basically are going to come up with troops because it's in their own self-interest, whether or not there's anybody popular in the White House or not.
If they make a wise decision, I think that will be the ultimate choice. But there are always some of these intangibles in diplomacy.
Where do you see, how many troops do you think that the final communique will say, and how many troops do you think European countries will cough up? You monitor the temperature because you're here at the Atlantic Council. You're in all of the meetings with foreign top defense and foreign policy officials. How many troops do you think Europe will come up with ultimately, or NATO nations will come up with?
Well, that's one of the things we're starting to see even before the summit. There's already been a decision that there's not going to be a declaration. There's not going to be a formal communique after the summit. Apparently there hasn't been enough consensus or enough time to build consensus on some of these issues. The United States may perhaps the troop levels we're sort of talking about right now are about 15,000, some even as high as 50,000. Certainly if it's that high of a number, it's going to be much harder to get NATO allies. But I think the thing that the U.S. has really set forward in is we're sort of looking for the continuation of the 40% level, so that whatever troop level the U.S. commits, that our allies will commit 40%. And I think that's a pretty fair standard.
Let's go to an issue that everybody in Washington is talking about intelligence sharing. Critics are questioning the president's decision to share what was highly classified intelligence information with the Russian delegation that met with him, Sergei Lavrov and Ambassador Kislyak. It looks like the intelligence information about ISIS laptop bombs on airliners came from Israel. And we've heard even from some overseas leaders questioning about whether the United States can now be trusted with intelligence information. How serious an issue is this as you monitor what folks out there are talking about? And what are some things the United States can do to if there is an erosion of trust, reinvigorate trust?
I think this is a very serious issue. This is something that is being brought up by key European leaders, and I think it's a very legitimate concern. But at the same time, I think right now they're being cautious. They're sort of trying not to disrupt the current relationships. But it is something they're keeping an eye on as we move forward. Well, we also have to keep in mind that the U.S. is, in many ways, the greatest collector of intelligence in the world. So we have a lot of intelligence that they want us to share with them. So it's in their interest to continue to share with us. But they have a lot of intelligence that we need as well. And if these type of incidents continue, it's going to be a question of lives being at stake, because if allies aren't sharing information that we need that make it difficult for us to prevent or to stop terrorist attacks, it may lead to some American lives being lost.
George, thanks very much.
Thank you, Vago.